Okay, so think about this for a second. You're diving into some complex topic, right? Maybe it's something you really want to get a handle on. And boom, suddenly you're just drowning in a sea of information. Articles, studies, opinions flying left and right. How do you sift through all that noise to find the nuggets of wisdom that can actually make a difference?
Right. It can feel overwhelming.
Totally. And that's where the deep dive comes in. We take that pile of material you've given us and we distill it down to those key insights, things that really matter, just for you.
So today we're taking a deep dive into the principles of Ray Dalio. You've shared some excerpts from his book, just called Principles, and it's a fascinating look into how he approaches, well, pretty much everything. Life, business, all of it.
Exactly. For anyone who might not know off the top of their head, Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater Associates. It's a hugely successful investment firm. And these principles, it's like his personal operating system. It's how he navigates all the complexities of work and life.
What's interesting is he was actually a bit hesitant to share these at first. Like he felt it might be a bit, presumptuous.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but seeing how they help the people around him, he decided to put it all down on paper.
That makes sense. So the material you've given us covers a lot of ground, right? We have his take on what principles are, why they matter so much, his fundamental philosophies about life.
Right, and how all that connects to his management style, which he sees as a direct extension of how he approaches life in general. The full document he mentions has something like 200 principles, covering a huge range of problems.
200 principles. That's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in. We want to make sure you walk away with a solid understanding of the core ideas behind Dalios' thinking without having to spend hours poring over the whole thing. Consider this your crash course in understanding a truly influential perspective on how to achieve your goals and navigate life more effectively, hopefully with a few aha moments along the way.
Exactly. Dalio even says that his hope is that you really engage with these ideas, think them through, and then see what rings true for you based on your own experiences and what you're trying to achieve.
I love that. So let's lay out our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack his understanding of what principles actually are, explore the early experiences that shaped his thinking, dig into those core life philosophies he holds, and then really break down his 5-step process for, as he puts it, getting what you want.
Sounds like a plan.
So let's start right at the beginning. What exactly does Dalio mean by principles, and why does he make such a big deal out of them?
Well, he sees principles as absolutely essential for achieving whatever it is you're aiming for in life. In fact, he even suggests that truly understanding a person requires understanding their principles. It's the underlying logic that drives their actions and decisions.
It's like that saying, actions speak louder than words.
Right. But Dalio takes it a step further. He's saying that to really get someone, you need to understand the why behind their actions.
Yeah.
And that why is often rooted in their principles.
He uses a really helpful analogy. It's like learning from a ski instructor or a basketball coach, right? You start by absorbing their principles, but as you practice and internalize those principles, they become your own guiding framework.
Exactly. It's not just about memorizing a list of rules. It's about understanding the underlying logic and making it a part of how you operate. What's interesting is that Dalio emphasizes that blindly adopting his principles, or anyone else's for that matter, is not the point.
Right. He's not saying just do what I do.
No, not at all. In fact, he actively encourages you to question everything. He wants you to critically examine each principle and ask yourself, is this true?
That makes total sense. It's about developing your own informed set of guidelines, not just following someone else's blueprint.
Right. You have to really believe in those ideas if you want them to guide your actions effectively.
So let's talk about some of those early experiences that shaped how Dalio thinks about these principles.
Well, he started out pretty young, wanting his own spending money. Pretty basic motivation.
Doesn't get much more fundamental than that.
Nope. So from a young age, he had a bunch of little jobs, delivering newspapers, mowing lawns, caddying.
And it was actually through caddying that he got his first taste of the stock market, right?
Yes. He'd overhear the people he was caddying for, talking about stocks during the 60s. It was a real boom time for the market back then.
Ah, the swinging 60s.
Right. So his first investment was in Northeast Airlines. And by his own admission, his logic was pretty simple. It was the cheapest stock he'd heard of, so he figured he could buy more shares.
And how'd that go?
Well, as luck would have it, the company got bought out and the stock tripled. He made a decent profit, but he quickly realized that the market wasn't always going to be that easy.
That must have been a pretty exciting but maybe a bit misleading first experience.
Definitely. He soon started experiencing losses, and that's when he really learned some valuable lessons. He understood that being consistently right in the markets is incredibly difficult, that holding on to bad opinions can be very costly, and that independent thinking is crucial because often the general consensus is wrong.
So you have to go against the crowd sometimes to be successful.
Often, yeah, especially when the crowd's wrong.
So what were some of the key takeaways from those early experiences? What started to shape his fundamental approach?
Well, he highlights a few key things. First, he was actively working for what he wanted instead of just passively following expectations. That gave him a sense of control and ownership over his life.
That makes sense. Feeling like you're driving the bus, not just along for the ride.
Exactly. And he was really proactive about seeking out smart people to challenge his ideas, to really test his thinking and expose any flaws in his logic. He valued the reasoning process, not just the conclusions themselves. And importantly, he developed this kind of healthy skepticism towards being overconfident. He learned to manage his not knowing by seeking more information or limiting his risk when he wasn't sure.
So it's not about always being right, but about knowing when you might be wrong.
Exactly. And then, of course, the importance of reflection, looking at the outcomes of his decisions and constantly learning and evolving from that feedback. It's a continuous loop of learning and adapting.
So these early experiences instilled in him the importance of thinking for himself, questioning assumptions, and being really honest with himself about what he does and doesn't know.
Absolutely. That's a great summary.
So how did these principles continue to evolve as he progressed in his career, particularly when he founded Bridgewater?
Well, he continued trading, even getting into commodities futures, which are notoriously complex. And he found his time at Harvard Business School really valuable.
What was it about Harvard that resonated with him?
He really liked the case study method, where you're analyzing real-world situations, problem-solving, and debating different perspectives. Then there was this pivotal moment when he was a summer clerk on the New York Stock Exchange, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system.
Oh, wow, I remember reading about that. That was a huge deal.
It was. This was a post-World War II agreement that fixed exchange rates. And when it collapsed, it caused this huge volatility in the currency markets. Talk about a trial by fire.
So it was like being thrown into the deep end of global finance.
Absolutely. And then, of course, came Bridgewater.
And how did his experiences building Bridgewater contribute to the ongoing development of his principles?
This is where he solidified his belief in the importance of accepting and dealing with reality, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. He saw that so many failures came from people not wanting to face reality, while success often came from embracing all of it, even the painful parts.
So this concept of truth becomes central, even when it's tough to stomach.
Exactly. He learned that the most beneficial thing you can do is uncover what's true. Admitting your mistakes, acknowledging weaknesses, and then using that knowledge to address those areas head on. He's adamant that there's no point in fearing truth, and that being completely truthful with yourself and others is essential for feedback, learning, and growth. He found that radical truthfulness, even though it's not always comfortable, led to much faster progress, even if it goes against how most people operate.
It sounds like a very direct, very pragmatic approach.
It is. And he points out a few key differences between his way of thinking and more conventional wisdom.
Like what?
Well, a lot of people believe that success is about learning what you're taught. But Dalio believes it's more about actively figuring things out for yourself.
Interesting. So it's not about passively absorbing knowledge, but about actively engaging with it and questioning it.
Right. And he also sees pain not as something to be avoided, but as something that makes you stronger, more resilient. It's a necessary part of growth. These are pretty fundamental shifts in perspective.
These early experiences clearly had a huge impact on how Dalio views the world, which led him to develop some pretty fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality and how it drives progress.
Yeah, and this is where it gets even more interesting, because he takes a deep dive into the nature of truth and evolution itself.
That's right. He draws a lot of insights from observing nature.
Yeah, he sees nature as this incredible model of perfection and efficiency. It operates through these complex systems that are constantly in motion, evolving, and adapting.
And he doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of nature, like the relationship between, say, hyenas and wildebeest.
Yeah, he even uses that example. On the surface, it seems brutal, but he argues that those dynamics, even death itself, are just a necessary part of this larger, super efficient system.
It's all part of the grand scheme of things.
Right. And what drives it all is evolution, this constant process of natural improvement. He believes that evolution, This movement towards better adaptation is the most powerful force in the universe, and it's inherently a good thing.
So even those things that seem negative play a crucial role in this broader evolutionary process. How does he tie all this back to human behavior and the goals we set for ourselves?
He believes that the desire to evolve, to improve, is a fundamental human drive, and that often the goals we set are just the bait that motivates us to learn and evolve in pursuit of them. It's the growth that happens along the way, more than the achievement itself, that matters.
That's a fascinating idea. Like our goals are almost a trick we play on ourselves to push us to evolve. I've never thought of it that way before.
It's a really insightful shift in perspective, right?
Yep.
It changes the focus from just reaching an endpoint to valuing the personal growth that happens throughout the journey.
It really does. And he also talks about the idea of self-interest and how it relates to evolution.
Yeah, he proposes that pursuing your own self-interest in a way that aligns with the fundamental laws of the universe and that contributes to this ongoing evolution will be rewarded. He sees this symbiotic relationship between what's good for you and what's good for the whole.
So it's not selfish to pursue your own interests.
Not necessarily. He's saying that when you provide something of value to society, often you'll find success and financial gain will follow. But the focus should be on the value you create, not just the money you make.
So it's about contributing something meaningful, and the rewards tend to come as a natural consequence of that. And of course, in a world that's changing so rapidly, being able to adapt is crucial, right?
Absolutely. He talks about how humans have this unique capacity to learn and therefore to evolve much faster than any other species. And he points out that everything has both good and bad attributes, depending on how they're used, and that nature is constantly striving for this balance.
So it's not about things being inherently good or bad, but about understanding their potential and using them wisely.
Right. And it all boils down to understanding what's real in order to make better decisions. He asks this really thought-provoking question. How much do you let what you wish were true stand in the way of seeing what is really true?
That's such a powerful question. And he also discusses how harmful it can be to hide the things you don't know or the things you're not good at, because that prevents you from learning and improving.
If you're not honest with yourself about where you are, you can't really take steps to get where you want to be.
Right. Now, Dalio also introduces this concept of 2Us and the machine. What's that all about?
It's about thinking about yourself and your goals from a higher level. He talks about higher level thinking, which is the ability to step back and design a machine, a system of people and processes that will help you achieve what you want. It involves this constant feedback loop. You set goals, you build your machine, the machine produces results, you compare those results to your goals, and you make adjustments.
So it's about constantly iterating and refining your approach based on the feedback you're getting.
Exactly. And this is where the 2Us come in. He says to think of yourself as two entities. You1, who is the designer, the overseer of the machine, and you2, who is a participant in the machine.
So like U1 is the coach and U2 is the player.
Yes. And the key is for you1 to be objective about you2. To honestly assess your own strengths and weaknesses, just like you would anyone else on your team.
It's almost like you have to step outside of yourself to see yourself clearly. That takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does. And this leads us to his 5-step process for getting what you want, which is really the heart of his practical framework.
So walk us through those steps.
Okay, the first step is having crystal clear goals. You need to know exactly what you're aiming for. Second, you have to identify and refuse to tolerate the problems that are preventing you from achieving those goals.
So it's not enough to just acknowledge the problems. You have to actively reject them.
Right. You can't just shrug your shoulders and say, well, that's just how it is. You have to have this intolerance for problems. And then step 3, you have to accurately diagnose those problems, get to the root cause.
So no Band-Aid solutions.
No, you need to understand the real issue if you want to solve it effectively. Step 4 is to design a plan that outlines the specific tasks that will help you overcome those problems and achieve your goals.
So it's not enough to just have a vague idea of what you need to do. You need a concrete plan of action.
Exactly, with clearly defined tasks and responsibilities. And then finally, step 5, the most important part, is to actually do those tasks. Implement your plan.
That's where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. And he stresses that every single one of these steps needs to be done well if you want to succeed.
So it's not a pick and choose kind of thing. You have to commit to the whole process.
Right. And he points out that each step requires different skills and disciplines. Some people are great at setting goals but struggle with execution. Others might be amazing at problem solving, but not so great at planning. The key is to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses, and then either work on developing the skills you lack or find people who can fill those gaps, and to approach the entire process rationally, not emotionally.
So let's unpack those steps a bit. What's the key to setting effective goals, according to Dalio?
Well, he doesn't go into a ton of detail in these excerpts, but the fundamental principle is clarity. You need to know exactly what you want to achieve. Your goals are like the compass guiding everything else.
Right. So you need to be crystal clear about your destination. And the second step, identifying and not tolerating problems. What does he say about that?
This is a big one for him. He sees problems not as obstacles, but as opportunities. He even says they're often screaming for your attention.
Interesting. So problems are not something to be feared, but rather embraced as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. He's saying that you have to be able to spot those problems and then absolutely refuse to just live with them. You can't just ignore them or hope they'll go away on their own. You have to bring them to the surface and define them precisely. And that's how you start to move forward.
It's about taking ownership and not just letting problems fester. So what about step 3? Accurately diagnosing problems. What are the keys to effective diagnosis?
He highlights a few important things. One is logic, obviously. Another is being able to consider multiple possible explanations, not just jumping to conclusions. And then there's this idea of being willing to touch people's nerves, meaning being willing to address ego barriers and have those tough conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
It's about getting to the heart of the issue, even if it's uncomfortable. No sugarcoating allowed.
Right. And the goal is always to get to the root cause, which often requires understanding people's motivations and behaviors.
So it's not just about identifying the problem, but about understanding the underlying dynamics that created it. And what about the fourth step, designing a plan? What makes a plan truly effective?
He talks about the need to really think things through, to be able to visualize how the entire process will unfold over time. It's almost like watching a movie in your mind, connecting the past to the present to the future.
So it's about being able to see the big picture, but also the individual steps that need to be taken.
Right. And he stresses the importance of actually writing down your plan with specific tasks and clear responsibilities, and constantly linking those tasks back to your overall goals so you don't lose sight of what you're ultimately trying to achieve.
So no winging it. And then the final step, step 5, is putting that plan into action, actually doing the work.
That's right. It's all about execution. He talks about having the right tools and benchmarks in place to track your progress, and the importance of discipline, proactivity, and that real drive to get things done.
So it's not enough to have a great plan. You have to have the grit and determination to see it through.
Absolutely. And he talks about how people who excel at execution tend to be very proactive, always thinking ahead and anticipating problems.
It's about being the one who makes things happen, not the one who just reacts to what's happening around them. It's fascinating how he breaks down something that seems so basic into these distinct yet interconnected stages. And of course, there are some underlying principles that guide the whole process.
Exactly. He's big on accuracy in everything, including how you assess yourself. And he talks about how Bridgewater's culture is built on the idea that everyone is constantly evolving, and that rapid improvement requires this commitment to what he calls hyperrealism and hypertruthfulness.
So it's about being brutally honest with yourself and others, no matter how uncomfortable it might feel.
Right, because that honesty is what fuels growth. And he also emphasizes the importance of having shared values and principles within a group. That's what drives how goals are set, how problems are identified and solved, and how solutions are actually implemented.
So that's the organizational culture piece. It's not just about individual principles, but about creating an environment where those principles are shared and upheld by everyone.
Right, and he talks a lot about the importance of feedback loops. Frequent, high-quality feedback leads to faster evolution, while poor feedback, or a lack of feedback, can actually hinder progress and even lead to decline.
So it's about creating a culture of constant feedback and learning. Now, to give our listeners a more concrete sense of how all of this translates into action, you shared some examples of his initial management principles. Can you highlight a few of those?
Yeah, absolutely. These really show how his broader life principles play out in a management context. He talks about radical transparency, like recording meetings so everyone has access to information.
Yeah.
And there's this zero tolerance policy for dishonesty.
So integrity is paramount. What else?
He's big on creating a culture where making mistakes is okay, but not learning from them is not.
That's a great distinction. Mistakes are inevitable, but it's how you respond to them that matters.
Right. And he stresses the need to move beyond blame and credit and just focus on being accurate.
No finger pointing allowed.
Exactly. And he's willing to invest heavily in making sure everyone is on the same page. He calls it getting in cinch.
It sounds intense, but also potentially very effective.
Hmm.
What else stands out to you from those management principles?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of hiring people whose values align with your own and having a really clear understanding of the difference between managing, micromanaging, and not managing at all, and constantly evaluating people's capabilities accurately.
So no more "that's not my job" kind of thinking. Everyone is expected to contribute to the overall success of the team.
Right. And he sees training as a way to guide personal evolution, not just teach skills.
It's about helping people become their best selves.
Yes. And he talks about knowing how to see problems, designing the machine around your goals, recognizing the power of saying, I don't know, making decisions based on logic and expected value, remembering the 80-20 rule.
The Pareto principle.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of open communication and a meritocracy of ideas, choosing to be the responsible party, valuing abilities and values over just skills, and understanding different thinking styles.
So recognizing that everyone has different strengths and weaknesses and figuring out how to leverage those differences effectively.
Right. It's a pretty comprehensive approach.
It really is, and he concludes by saying that all these principles are part of an ongoing journey, right?
Absolutely. It's a continuous process of learning and refining, both for individuals and organizations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Ray Dalio's principles, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
The core message is this: having well-defined principles that are rooted in a clear understanding of reality and a commitment to continuous learning and evolution is crucial for achieving your goals. And his 5-step process provides a really practical framework for doing just that.
So as you're listening to this, think about which of Dalio's early life lessons or steps in the 5-step process really resonate with you. How might you apply these concepts to the challenges you're facing right now or the goals you're working towards?
And here's a final thought to chew on. Given Dalio's emphasis on truth and the idea that facing our weaknesses is necessary for growth, how might embracing discomfort instead of avoiding it actually be the most direct path to achieving significant growth in your own life? It's definitely something to think about. And of course, we encourage you to explore Ray Dalio's principles further, or to spend some time reflecting on your own guiding principles. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Okay, so think about this for a second. You're diving into some complex topic, right? Maybe it's something you really want to get a handle on. And boom, suddenly you're just drowning in a sea of information. Articles, studies, opinions flying left and right. How do you sift through all that noise to find the nuggets of wisdom that can actually make a difference?
Right. It can feel overwhelming.
Totally. And that's where the deep dive comes in. We take that pile of material you've given us and we distill it down to those key insights, things that really matter, just for you.
So today we're taking a deep dive into the principles of Ray Dalio. You've shared some excerpts from his book, just called Principles, and it's a fascinating look into how he approaches, well, pretty much everything. Life, business, all of it.
Exactly. For anyone who might not know off the top of their head, Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater Associates. It's a hugely successful investment firm. And these principles, it's like his personal operating system. It's how he navigates all the complexities of work and life.
What's interesting is he was actually a bit hesitant to share these at first. Like he felt it might be a bit, presumptuous.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but seeing how they helped the people around him, he decided to put it all down on paper.
That makes sense. So the material you've given us covers a lot of ground, right? We have his take on what principles are, why they matter so much, his fundamental philosophies about life.
Right. And how all that connects to his management style, which he sees as a direct extension of how he approaches life in general. The full document he mentions has something like 200 principles, covering a huge range of problems.
200 principles. That's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in. We want to make sure you walk away with a solid understanding of the core ideas behind Dalios' thinking without having to spend hours poring over the whole thing. Consider this your crash course in understanding a truly influential perspective on how to achieve your